Hi, it's Mr. Brough here. We're going to do one last clip focusing on the end of the Protectorate and the return of the monarchy. And this, I suppose, that the start of all of this process starts in September 1958 when Cromwell dies. Now, you've got to think at this point that the Republic has been there in one form or another for over a decade. And yet, within 18 months, this experiment of a republic is gone and Charles II is on the throne. To understand why, you have to understand that Cromwell was the power and he was the authority across the land. And he was the person who was holding the nation together. And when he died, that force that was holding the nation together died with him. Now, Cromwell passed the power over to his son, Richard Cromwell, but he wasn't really up to the job. Who would be? And Richard Cromwell was eventually forced to resign. And then you have a power struggle. On the one side, Parliament. On the other side, the army. And really, since, I suppose, 1645, realistically, the new model army had been the uncontested source of power in the country. So it's perhaps no surprise that the army would win that power struggle. You've also, though, got a power struggle within the army. So you have a power struggle between two people, Lambert, and the other person was Monk. Lambert was more radical. He was the person who came up with the instrument of government. Monk was more conservative. He'd actually started the Civil War fighting for the Royalists. And Monk prevailed in terms of that personal struggle to control the army. Ultimately, Monk defeated Lambert. And a good quote from Monk, he said he wanted to see my country freed from the intolerable slavery of a sword government. So there was a power struggle in the army, and Monk won that power struggle, but Monk did not want the army to be in control of England. So that's ultimately the story that we're looking at here. So in September 1638, Richard Cromwell replaces Oliver Cromwell as Lord Protector, and most people supported this, so that wasn't a problem. However, Britain was £2,500,000 in debt, and the army was owed about £900,000 in wages. Richard Cromwell didn't have any choice but to recall Parliament, which would have been the third Protectorate Parliament. And that's where the problems came. So once this third Protectorate Parliament met, there was a significant power struggle between the army and the Republicans, led by Arthur Haselrig, over the precise details of the Protectorate moving forward. Richard Cromwell tried to do the right thing. He called together a council of officers to bring sides together. And one of the things that was asked for, the army asked for an indemnity, so they wouldn't be prosecuted for offences carried out between 1553 and 1559. And in response, the Republican Party called for the army to stay out of Parliament's business. So you have this council of officers that is meant to sort things out, and there is conflict within this council of officers. And obviously, Richard Cromwell's in charge. What he does is he decides with Parliament rather than the army. Richard Cromwell orders the dissolution of the council of officers and says that they should leave London. Well, there's no way the army are going to put up with that. So instead what the army did is they forced Richard Cromwell out of power. Major General Disrow forced Richard Cromwell to dissolve the third Protectorate Parliament. So then that was the end of the Protectorate. And the Council of Officers, in other words the army, is now in charge of England, of Britain. So Richard Cromwell was removed from power. He resigned in April 1659. And for want of any other better ideas, the army asked the Rump Parliament to return, the parliament that had been the Commonwealth from 1649 to 1653. But that didn't provide stability either. There was then a power struggle between the army and MPs in the Rump, both seeking to limit the other's power. They did unite briefly to suppress a sort of conservative rebellion in Cheshire, the Booths Rebellion of August 1659. However, after that, the Rump proceeded to sack 9 senior officers from the army, and Major General John Lambert marched on Westminster and expelled the Rump from Westminster, just as Cromwell had done in 1653. So then the army set up a temporary and interim government, which was called the Committee of Safety, and this just existed for a couple of months between October and December 1659. At this point, there was real risk that London was going to descend into anarchy. There was no support for the army being in control. There were clashes, lots of clashes between the apprentices, young men in the army. And so, in a bid to bring stability, the leader of the Republican faction from the Rump, which was Sir Arthur Haselrig, contacted General Monk, who was in Scotland, and asked him if he would return to England to bring some order. Now, Monk brought down with him 10,000 soldiers. Monk believed that Parliament was the source of authority, and whilst it looked like there might be a clash between Monk and Lambert, actually a lot of Lambert's army just kind of disappeared, and there was no clash. And so Monk reinstated the Rump Parliament. However, proving they'd learnt no lessons whatsoever, the Rump Parliament then tried to purge the army again, and they tried to limit Monk's power by saying he had to police London. The Rump Parliament had no credibility with people. It was seen as corrupt. Merchants and traders in London didn't want to pay any taxes to it. So again, there was a chance that London and therefore Britain would slide into anarchy. And at this point, Monk decides to take some action. So he does bring order to London, but then what he also does, he insists that all living MPs who had been purged from Parliament by Colonel Pride in December 1648 should return. And this was really important because what Monk was basically doing is he was reinstating the Long Parliament that had last sat in December of 1648. So the restored Long Parliament met between February and March 1660, and the fact that you had all of these MPs returning, it tilted the power balance away from Arthur Haselrig. And what then happened is that Parliament excluded staunch Republicans like John Lambert. Monk played his cards very close to his chest. He didn't at this point declare for the monarch. He did persuade MPs that he should be Commander-in-Chief of England and that the Long Parliament dissolve and new elections be held. John Lambert attempted and failed to rebel against this, and his regiments were beaten again at Edge Hill, actually, in 1660. At the same time, what Monk is doing is he is communicating with Charles. He persuaded Charles to move from Catholic France to Protestant the Netherlands and stay in a place called Breda. And Charles basically, from Breda, wrote a declaration of, I suppose, conciliatory terms for him becoming King of England. So then, between April and May 1660, a new parliament met, which was called the Convention Parliament. Monk ensured that there were fair and there were free elections. And actually, what happened then is this parliament received MPs who were far more sympathetic to the restoration of Charles II. The House of Lords is reinstated when Parliament meets on the 25th of April. And then both houses, the Commons and the Lords, voted to accept the Declaration of Breda. So on the 8th of May 1660, it was officially declared that Britain as a republic was over, and that government once again was made up of the Crown, the Lords and the Commons, as it is to this day. On the 14th of May 1660, a deputation, a group of Leithian people, went over and visited Charles and invited him to return. And this was very symbolic as well, the fact that Charles didn't go uninvited back to Britain. He waited for people to return to him. He waited for people to visit him and invite him back, because again then it seemed that the power is with Parliament. On the 29th of May 1660, Charles is then escorted by Monk into London. There is a ceremonial return to London. Massive crowds, lots of very happy people. Not everyone was delighted, but there was a sense of relief that 20 years of turmoil were over. Okay, so what I'd like you to do, please, have a go at the tasks that I've asked you to do. And if you do those tasks and you play through this a number of times, then you will have a good understanding of the final 18 months of the Republic and why the Republican experiment failed. Okay, thanks very much.